anyways, he rather felt that all these local areas were disappearing, including a lot of them that in Illinois, the state Department of Conservation, it was called then, was offered some of these areas and turned them down because they were too small, and because the State Department of Conservation was interested in hunting. That's where they got their money. They didn't get their money from anything but hunting and dog racing and things like that. And they got the license fees from that, and they really weren't very interested in natural areas. Well, George became the chairman of the Conservation Department of the Illinois State Academy of Science, and he wrote quite a bit about the disappearance of natural areas. And that's all documented. And then he felt that it wasn't just happening in Illinois, but it was happening across the country, that these areas might be successfully set aside by a small group, a nature study group or something, but that it was an awful lot of work to set up an organization to save one area, and that when the perpetrators of saving the area passed on or went away some way, that the area could be in jeopardy. Some of them, of course, were under museums or universities, but even then, there wasn't any way to protect them or to help the groups that were organizing. And so that was his main feeling when we went to Washington. He became vice president of the Ecologists Union. They were fairly new organization, and they were professors who were working mainly on getting the government interested in large areas. This was when there still were getting the parks and everything, and they were interested in a large prairie area in the Dakotas or Kansas somewhere. And they did not really even dream of doing anything with small areas, except maybe getting a university to take one over or something. So that was why he went ahead, and he wrote out not only the solicitation letters to get people in, but he wrote the bylaws and everything for Nature Conservancy.
And so when you moved to Washington, was that because of this job, the Ecologists Union?
He didn't have a job.
Oh, you just moved?
We just moved. We lived in one room, and he got no money, no compensation for I don't know how long, a long time.
And then who were some of the other main people involved with the Nature Conservancy getting started, and what was your part of it?
Well, I at first had a job that kept on doing this, work in doctor's offices, which didn't pay much, but I at least gave us income to have a room. But who were the other people? Well, we worked with the Howard Zahniser, the head of the Wilderness Society, and he took a great interest in George, but they weren't interested in doing anything with natural areas. They are more sort of philosophical about preserving areas. And then he worked with Fred Packard, who ran the National Parks Association. Fred, and we were all in the same office, same building, not in the same office. But again, the National Parks Association, they weren't interested. And what we first tried to do, or George first tried to do, was have legislation passed to set up Nature Conservancy in the same form that the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Have you heard of that? They were set up just a year or so before Nature Conservancy, before we went to Washington. And we studied their bylaws. And so George tried to get that through the Congress. And we got an exceedingly fine sponsor from Florida. I'll think of his name. I just had it. And he was very good, and he just pushed it real good. But I think it was the department, several of the departments were fine on it, but I think it was the Department of Interior that dragged their heels. And it looked like nothing would happen. So, that we were just kind of put in limbo first. So after several months, George decided to set up the organization as a nonprofit organization. And we immediately set out to, I say we, because I didn't do anything, but he immediately set out to build a membership. And I can remember the first letter he sent out about the is it Nini duck in Hawaii? The duck that was disappearing, coming extinct. We got pretty good response, and it seemed like it was just an increase every time. Now, most of the people, and I say this with great knowledge of who came in to support, it wasn't the people that should have helped. It wasn't the people, the ecologists. Who was it? Just the people like you or whatever, the others. It was never the people that really should have helped.
So you said you didn't do anything, but I bet you were licking stamps and talking about everything.
Oh yeah, I would fold letters until I had blisters on my fingers. My thumb would have blisters. And George went to the library because we couldn't afford to, he wasn't paid, and we couldn't afford to hire anybody. And he got books on motion study and how to do things, in the most efficient way. And then also, he found out that the various departments of the government, like the Department of Labor, Department of this or that, had sales of what they called surplus equipment. Often they were broken down things. So they were these silent auction, or you put in a bid. And so he became very proficient at that. And he bought ever so much equipment. I was just saying yesterday that he was the first one among the various preservation societies like National Parks and Wilderness and all those that got a copying machine. And we were among the first, or if not the first, to get electric typewriters. And we couldn't even find a secretary that wanted to use electric typewriter because they didn't have the touch, for for doing it, and we had electric typewriters. We had machines that you could attach 4 or 5 typewriters to each other and they'd all be typing at the same time. I don't know what you call those now. And we had, I can't believe all the equipment he got. It was really fantastic. The place was full of this surplus, and he got it all going. And I remember we had the IBM repairman once when he kind of thought he should have some help. Usually he fixed things anyways by himself, but we had the IBM man, he had the manual, George did, and the IBM repairman said, well, he thought George knew more than he did, so the two of them worked together and it got going or not, but George enjoyed doing that.
Well, so was it hard to get the nonprofit status? Did that take some time?
Oh, I don't think so.
No? Just how...
He did it himself. He didn't hire lawyers. I just got a lawyer's bill today. I don't think he should get near lawyers.
But that meant that he had to learn how to do it and all the paperwork, right? And he obviously did it.
He just went to the library and studied. He was great on studying at the library.
So,
you know, I mean, you don't find many people that can do what he did.
right. So once the Nature Conservancy started, you stayed in Washington, what, another 5 or 10 years or so?
About 9, almost 10 years we were there.
And what were the early years of the Nature Conservancy, and when did you decide that it was going strong enough that you could leave?
Well, we didn't really decide that. That's a long story, and you know, I don't think the biography, Mr. Pearson, did a good job at all on that. But on the other hand, you know, the Nature Conservancy recently has had a great deal of problem that was all written up in the Washington Post. And we found that in the case of the Nature Conservancy, as we were there, we had some of the same problems. People wanted to, maybe could be persuaded to dedicate an area near them, sort of like they were surrounded by a bog or something, and they'd be willing to help with that. But they wanted it as their private domain. And this is what they've been having trouble with that. We had trouble with one person, I don't know how wealthy he was, but from Norfolk, Connecticut, who was doing work on the vegetation under the high lines, you know, trying to keep the trees out and everything and spraying herbicides selectively and everything. And he wanted to put a large sum of money in the Nature Conservancy, but he didn't want anybody to touch it. That was his money. And George told him that you couldn't do that. And he became almost rabid. I mean, rabid. Wrote letters to everybody and things like that.
He was using it as a
so
tax.
it became a rather difficult time, and the president changed, and the president was a friend of this person writing rabid letters. So I think the guy was sort of off balance, anyways. The person that was making such a fuss, and the president never talked to us, but went and raised a lot of problems. So it wasn't a happy ending, let's say.
So, do you remember what was the first piece of land saved by Nature Conservancy?
Well, there was a piece in Pennsylvania by the Copes that they wanted to preserve. It was a forest land. We raised money for like, oh, there was a Mettler's Woods in New Jersey that had never been cut, and the Rutgers wanted that. And we, for the famous bird sanctuary down in the southern part of Florida, what's that? It just escapes me right now. But we raised money for quite a few things. We did not always take title, and that's a long story too. Some of the people in the organization, Dick Pohl, for instance, felt we should just not have any staff. You know, he didn't want staff, didn't want money going to that, just sort of haphazard doing things, and George was very organized. So I guess that's about all I can tell you about Nature Conservancy.
Well, I guess one little bit I'd like to, if you can give me some insight on this, is how did it go from being just the two of you to being an organization?
George always was in favor of having professional help, and he felt that one professional help could do the work of a whole crew of volunteers, and he always wanted that. He would rather not have any sort of compensation in order to get somebody else working with him.